Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Danialexadesign. I'm Dani or Danialexa or Daniela, whichever you prefer. I don't mind either. And in today's video, I will be continuing the elegant evening dress for my sorority sister. This will be a tutorial video that explains my process in putting this dress together. If you haven't seen part 1 to the series, then I highly recommend to watch it and come back. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it'll really help this channel grow. Alright, I'm so excited. Let's get right into the video. The materials you will need are your matching thread, an invisible zipper, your completed pattern pieces, pins and needles, cutting tools, and of course, your beautiful fabric, along with interfacing. I'm using a lightweight green lining fabric and medium woven shell fabric and lightweight interfacing. First, I will prep my fabric by washing, drying, and ironing it. Then I will iron my interfacing to the entire top portion of my shell and lining fabric. So my fabric was about 41 inches wide and I iron on about 10 inches long. I do this so when I cut out my bodice pieces, there is no chance for anything to shrink once I cut out my pattern. To make it clear, I am only ironing enough interfacing for my lower front and back bodice pieces, not the cups, straps, or skirt. I want to gather the cups and have the skirt be flowy, and the interfacing will only make that difficult. I did end up having to overlap my interfacing because I honestly didn't have enough. So please don't be like me and buy enough interfacing for your projects. Next, I'm going to lay down my shell and lining fabric and my pattern pieces, noting all important lines and notches. Also, I make sure to cut out 2 pieces where I indicated on the pattern, and all I'm doing is just cutting it out. So I didn't make a pattern piece for the ruffle that's going to be at the bottom of the dress. That's why you kind of see me flipping the fabric all over the place. I just took my skirt hem measurement and times it by 3. I did need more fabric for this part, but it's okay. Now I am just laying out my lower center front and side front pieces of my bodice, and I'm currently working on the shell fabric, and I'm going to match the notches and sew down those straight lines. Next, I am going to do the same thing for the side back and center back pieces. I'm just going to lay those pieces out and then sew the shell pieces together. And then once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and sew the lining pieces together, and then I will move on to the cup. Because my sorority sister will have a more intricate design, I'm going to show you what I did for her pattern pieces. I'm going to proceed in the same manner as I did for my dress, but instead for her, I'm going to be attaching a lace piece to the shell pieces. I do this by pinning the lace pattern piece to the shell pattern piece, and I use as many pins as necessary to make sure it won't move as I'm sewing it down in my sewing machine. So I pin it all the way around, and then once I'm done with that, I'll take it to my sewing machine and I will use my widest stitch and baste around the entire perimeter within the sewing allowance, and then the piece will act as one. Once I finish sewing all of the seams, I make sure to give all of my pieces a very good press, as that makes it look nice and crisp. Once I finished pressing, I went ahead and top stitched the seam allowance on either side of each piece. I think it added a really nice touch to the overall design and the look, and I'm really happy with how it came out. And this is how it looked after I finished top stitching. You tell me what you think, but I think the top stitching just looks really nice and adds a level of elegance to the whole pattern piece. I'm in love with it. So yeah. Now I'm going to stay stitch the curve of my cup piece area. I don't really know what to call that part, but I am going to stay stitch so that way when I go to add in my cup, it doesn't stretch. To start off the cup piece, the way that I like to sew darts is I basically cut open the dart lines on my pattern piece, and then I lay it on top of the piece with the dart, and I use a marker, pen, or pencil, whatever you prefer to use, and I just put little dots on the wrong side of the fabric so it doesn't show on the front, and that way I could use that as my guideline for sewing, and I know where to line up my pins. And then once I do that, I will fold the dart, pin it, and sew it. I will also do the same on my lining pieces as well. While I'm here at the sewing machine, I'm just going to sew 2 rows of basting stitches on both my shell and lining fabric and pull it to gather the center front pieces of my cup. And once I have it gathered the way that I like, I'm going to pin both sides together and then sew a straight line down. And this is what the gathers look like. I'm very happy with it, and you know, if you watched the last video, how annoyed I was with the gathers at first, so I'm really happy with these. Now I'm just going to pin my cups to the lower front pieces. I am going to match up my notches first, just so I can make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Then I will go ahead and clip into the seam, not through the stay stitching, but just right up against it, so that way I can stretch it and it'll match the curve of the cup. This just makes it easier to sew, and when you have reverse curves like this, it makes the process a whole lot easier and a whole lot faster. This is what the final front bodice piece looks like, and I'm very happy with it. It is nice and it's very, very neat. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to clip into the seam, again, not through the stitching line, but right up to it, so that way when I iron it, it'll lay as flat as possible. After I iron it towards the lower bodice pieces, I am going to top stitch it. Not a lot of people would do this because it is kind of complicated, but I think it was very worth it in the end because it just looks so nice and so neat, and the point is definitely like, it's sharp. Next, I'm going to pin the side back pieces and the side front pieces together, and I'm just going to sew that straight seam. Do all the same steps for the lining piece. It's the same exact process, it's the same exact thing, except if you don't want to do all the top stitching on the lower bodice pieces, you don't have to. Now I'm going to prepare the straps, and if you would prefer the bows instead of just a straight strap, I will explain that in a little while. All I did was take 2 rectangular pieces of fabric and I'm just sewing it together. Once I sew down both sides, I'm going to trim the excess seam and turn it inside out. And then once I've turned it out, I'll press it, and then I will do a layer of top stitching on both sides. Let me know if you would like a more in-depth tutorial on how to do straps, because I did kind of speed through that. It's kind of similar for the bows, but still, if it was too confusing, let me know. So it's going to be relatively the same process for the bows, but instead of only using 4 pieces of fabric, you're going to use 8, because you're going to have one bow on one strap on each side. So 2 in the front, 2 in the back, so 4 in total, if that makes sense. And since we're layering it, it's going to be 8. I don't know if that made sense, but yeah. So all I'm doing is I'm taking 2 layers of fabric, I am laying them right sides together, and I'm going to sew all the way down, and I'm going to pivot and then sew on the other side and then pivot again, but I'm going to leave a hole right at that point so that way I could turn it inside out. Next, I'm going to trim the excess, and then once I've trimmed all the excess, I'm going to turn it right side out, press, and then top stitch. Now that the bodice piece is done and the straps are done, I'm going to move on to working on the skirt. First, I'm going to locate all of my notches on the skirt, and I'm going to focus on the front pieces because there will be a slit. And so since there's a slit, I'm going to find my notches and make sure I operate on the right side. So I'm going to serge down both sides of the front left and the front right that will be sewn together, so that way nothing will fray as I'm sewing. Then once I serge it, I am going to also serge my pockets so that way they will have a clean finish on the inside of my skirt. I'm going to pin my front pieces together so I can sew the slit. I do have a video where I explained how I sew my slits more in depth, but basically what I'm doing is I'm going to pin the skirt from the waistline to the slit notch, and then I'm just going to sew all the way down and stopping at the slit notch. Then once I do that, I'm just going to press everything open, and I'm going to press the serged edge under. And then once that's pressed under, I'm just going to top stitch from the hemline up to the slit notch. Now that the slit is done, we can focus on the pockets. There are notches to indicate where the pockets should start on all pattern pieces. So I'm just going to sew the pockets to the front right and front left side, and I'm also going to do the same for the back pieces. And then once I do that, I'm going to flip the pocket over and top stitch it down to the skirt. So the seam allowance was flipped towards the pocket and it was top stitched down. Now that that's done, I'm going to attach my back pieces to my front pieces, and I'm just going to sew down to the pocket notch. Then I'm going to go sew around the pocket. Then I'm going to pivot and sew all the way down to the hem. And that's it. That's how you sew in side seam pockets. I went ahead and I put my lining skirt pieces together, so it's just one long huge rectangle. I did it the exact same way. I did my shell skirt just minus the pocket pieces. So now all I'm doing is I'm sewing 2 rows of basting stitches, so that way I can pull so that way I can pull the thread to match the length of the waistline of the bust. And all that's going to do is create gathers and give it the fullness that I was talking about in part 1. I try to make sure that my gathers are as even as possible, and to make sure that it's not all gathered in one place, because then it'll just look entirely wrong. So you really want to make sure that your gathers are evenly spaced. I do the same thing for the skirt shell piece, and then once it's all gathered, I will attach it to the bodice pieces and then sew it together. Let me know if you guys could tell, but I was actually pinning the skirt layers wrong in that last clip. I was sandwiching the bodice pieces in between the skirt layers when I should have just treated the skirt layers as if it was one skirt and just attached it like that, so that way I could, when I add in the zipper, I could just treat the skirt as one layer instead of two separate layers, if you know what I mean. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm pinning the lining skirt and the shell skirt together so that way I can attach my zipper. If you want an in-depth tutorial of how to insert a zipper, let me know and I could for sure make one, but for now, just sit back and watch. I'm really happy with how the dress is turning out so far. Right now, all the seams match up, all the zipper waistline matches up, and I'm just really happy with the overall outcome so far. Now I'm going to close the dress. I'm going to sew the two skirt layers separately. I'm going to sew the skirt lining layer separately, and then I'm going to sew the shell separately. But first I'm going to cut my zipper and then burn it a little bit so that way it doesn't fray and the zipper stop doesn't accidentally come out. But yeah, now I'm just going to take my zipper foot and I'm going to sew as close as I can up from the hem to where I stopped at the zipper and then press it open. We are so close to the finish line, guys. I can almost taste it. But now I'm going to take my lining bodice piece and I'm going to serge the bottom edge and the center back edges, and then I'm going to just fold up the hem of the bodice piece seam allowance up a 1/2 inch, so that way when I attach it to the bodice piece it'll have a clean edge. So I'm going to encase the zipper into the lining, and then I'm also going to sandwich my straps in between the bodice pieces, and I put a strap at the notch at the cup and at the side back seam. That probably didn't make any sense, but here's a tutorial. First, I lay out my strap as I would have it when I would wear it. So I'm going to put my strap right at that seam where the center back and the side back meet. And then I'm just going to curve it up, make sure it's straight, and place it where the notch is at the cup, right in between the shell and the lining. And I'm going to repeat that step on the other side, and then sew from the zipper all the way to the other side. For my sorority sister's dress, I'm going to do the same thing, but instead of attaching the end of the bow to the back pieces, I'm just going to make sure I match the way the point is going to the other side, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm just kind of talking gibberish right now, but hopefully you can see what I'm doing and you'll understand. But I'm placing 2 straps in the front and 2 straps at the back, so it basically goes in the same places that I did my dress. And then again, I'm going to attach the lining to the bodice piece, to the shell bodice piece, and then sew from one side of the zipper all the way to the other side. So I did go ahead and sew everything together, and then I serged the raw edge, and then I clipped into the curves to make sure that once I turned everything over, it would lay flat. Now I'm just going to understitch all the seam allowance to the lining side so it lays as flat as possible. Now I'm going to start working on the ruffled edge at the bottom, and this, honestly, I have no words. It took so long because, like I said earlier in the video, I didn't have enough fabric, so I ended up having to sew 2 pieces of fabric together, and then I had to serge the entire bottom edge, and I actually, never mind, I didn't serge it, I just sewed it together. I sewed 2 rows of basting stitches along the whole thing. I believe it was 100 inches long, give or take a few inches, and 2 rows of basting stitches. Oof, it took me forever, and then pulling it took me forever, but it was so worth it in the end because it looked so beautiful. But yes, all I did was gather it. I gathered it to be as small as possible, and then I stretched it so that way I could get it to match the skirt. Once I stretched it, I sewed the ruffle to the hem of the skirt, and I serged it, and now I'm just top stitching the seam allowance to the skirt. I'm not even gonna lie, I was so frustrated with the hem that I didn't even bother to record it all, but I was intending to do a rolled hem, but it was so long that I couldn't find it in me. So I just serged the bottom edge, and I folded it up a 1/2 inch so that way it would look pretty on the outside, which it did, because I'm sure if you didn't know that it wasn't a rolled hem, you wouldn't have noticed. So I'm still treating my skirt lining and my skirt shell as if it's two separate skirts. So I didn't want to sew down the slit. I didn't want to leave it separate either, so I decided to use this hemming tape, and basically all you have to do is sandwich the tape in between the fabric layers and put heat on it, and it'll melt, and it actually was amazing. It kept the two layers together, and I to this day I have no issues with it. So if you're lazy and you're not looking to sew anything, you can definitely use hemming tape to put your fabric pieces together, and it won't fray, it won't come apart. I definitely recommend. When I don't remember the name of the tape off the top of my head, but when I do, I will put it in the top corner. But yeah, you just have to take your time with this because it is very easy to not line up your layers properly, but once it is lined up, it looks as if it's one fabric. The only downside is that you can't sew through the tape. Now all I'm doing is I am stitching in the ditch to attach the bodice lining to the rest of the dress. So I'm stitching very close to the ditch between the skirt and the bodice shell layer, and you have to constantly keep making sure that you are catching the bodice piece underneath. And lastly, all I'm doing is I am attaching a hook and eye above the zipper, and once that's done, the dress is completed. Thank you all so much for watching. This is the final dress, and my sorority sister absolutely loved her dress. And this dress is so lightweight. It's so much more light than you would think it is. And I'm just so happy with the outcome. And I appreciate you guys so much for being on this journey with me and watching and subscribing. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to see more from me, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video. Oh, also leave a comment of what you would like to see me make next, because I'm down for anything. Thanks, guys. Bye.